Our 2010 Suzuki Jimny finally broke. And after 4 days of diagnosing it, ChatGPT concluded that the ECU is fried. Now, spoiler alert, it wasn't, but in this video, we're going to go through all the things I tested in order to figure out why it wouldn't start. Now, full disclosure, I'm not a mechanic, and my process is not as methodical as it should be, but I'm working on it. Now, in the 10 years that we've owned this Suzuki, it's never let us down. But we've been away for a week on holiday, so when we came back, my wife tried to start the car and it just made a nasty noise. Now, I naively believed it was just a dead battery because it's 4 years old, and about a year ago, we did run it flat by leaving the lights on. So I thought it's a quick charge or at worst, a new battery. It wasn't that. It took me the whole week to figure out what it was. And here are the 22 things I tested before I found the issue. So the obvious first thing I did was to charge the battery overnight on my C-Tech charger. And the next morning, cranked the car, nothing, same weird noise. Then I looked at the side glass on the battery and it didn't show green as it should, it showed blank. So I assumed the battery was dead. So then I recharged the battery overnight, ran off to the parts store and had the battery load tested. And they said the battery's fine. Now, because the battery's already 4 years old, I decided to just replace the battery. At least then we know it's not gonna let us down in the future. When I put it back, I thought the car was gonna start, but it didn't. It still made the same noise. The next obvious thing I suspected was the starter motor. So I heard it spin, but it wasn't cranking over the engine. So I thought maybe the Bendix gear is not kicking in. I was hoping that's not the case because the starter in this Jimny is almost impossible to get out. And if you read online, that's probably the worst job on this car. But then to test that, I cranked the engine while looking at the fan blades, and I could see the whole engine, everything, the accessories are turning over as I cranked it. So the starter was actually engaging, but it was not firing the engine. So starter was not the issue. So this is where I started using ChatGPT to help me. Yeah, you can laugh if you want, but it kind of helped, it kind of didn't. So the first thing it suggested was the crank positioning sensor. It said it's a common issue on these. I confirmed that by looking on forums. So either it's dirty or it's broken, and it's supposedly a quick and easy fix. Now, there are a whole bunch of diagnostic tests, but for that you have to back probe it while it's in position, and because it's behind the alternator, it's quite difficult. So, lazy as I am, I thought I'll just take it out, clean it, and plug it back in, and hopefully it works. So, let me show you where that sits. So, initially GPT said it's this thing here, but it's totally not. That is the VVTi valve, so that plug there. Where it is behind the alternator. So that down there, that thing there is the alternator. So that needs to be moved out of the way, the belt needs to come off, and then behind that, on the engine block, lives the crank positioning sensor. So I actually managed to get it out without too much fuss, and I tested the resistance, which looked fine. I cleaned it, and I popped it back in. It didn't make a difference. Next, I looked at the cam sensor, and that one sits right there on the head. And again, I took it out, cleaned it, put it back in, and I wasn't sure how to test it, but it didn't make a difference. So this is where I got clever. GPT suggested that if I plug in the scan tool and look for a RPM signal or the tacho, just the engine speed signal, that would suggest that the crank positioning sensor is working because it gets the data from it. So I plugged in this X-Tool A30M that I got for free. I made a video on this. I'll link it up here somewhere. And as I cranked the engine, I could see the revs goes up to about 160, 170 RPM. So that confirmed that at least the crank positioning sensor is working and it's not the issue. Okay, I did at some point thought it was the Immobilizer, because when you switch on, that light on the dash doesn't go out. And GPT said it should go out after a few seconds, and definitely if you start cranking it should go out, but it didn't. So then I looked for the spare keys, which took forever because I put it in a weird place, and it did exactly the same thing. Now the conclusive test that the immobilizer was not blocking it was the fact that there is an injector pulse. So it's actually sending a signal to the injectors to open up briefly when you crank the key. And if the immobilizer was blocking it, there would have not been that signal or that injector pulse on the scan tool. So with the scan tool still plugged in, I actuated the fuel pump and I could hear it running. So that at least confirmed that the fuel pump relay is working. So next, I went through all the fuses and relays that I could find that says either ignition, fuel pump, or EFI, or anything related. And there are a whole lot of them. So these two big ones, GPT said, is the EFI relay and the fuel pump relay. They look similar to these Denso ones here. And then there is another one that says FI main, and this one says FP or fuel pump. You can see it there, those two big ones. So apparently it goes through the one, that one there, and then through that one there. And the same with the fuel pump there and there. Then we also have an ignition 40 amp one and another ignition 250 amp one. So those two, I checked those. I checked all the small little fuses. There's another one that says fuel injection, and then also under there's another little fuse box, and there's another ignition one in there. So I did a whole lot of Googling and YouTubing on how to test relays, and I'll make a separate video on that because I found a great video that explains it very simply for someone like me that doesn't know at all how these types of relays work and what the pins mean. So, and they are very common. But I checked all of them and they all worked 100% fine. So all the easy stuff has now been checked and I was still stumped. Now this was already the third day, so I was just in between work trying different things as I thought of them. So next, I took out one of the injector plugs. There's only two wires. I tested that the one has power, it did. I tested that the other one had continuity to the battery negative, it did. I didn't check for pulse or signal as I cranked it because I was too lazy and I need someone to help me. So that's one thing, at least there was power getting to it from the ignition, but I wasn't sure yet whether it pulses. And one way to test that was to use a stethoscope, like, excuse the mess, this thing. But for that I needed a helper, so for now I knew it had power, I didn't know whether it gets a signal. And then because I was lazy and haphazard, I wanted to test the MAF sensor. Maybe it was completely faulty, and I just unplugged it and that would default to a default setting and the car should start. It didn't, so I know it wasn't that. Then I unplugged the throttle positioning sensor, that one there. I actually broke the tab because it's brittle. But anyways, unplugged that. Hopefully that would reset that to a default setting. Also didn't make a difference, so I assumed that was good. Let me know in the comments if that is a worthy test or if it's a valid test. So the next two tests were probably the most conclusive and helpful, and I should have done it a lot earlier. One thing I've been putting off was to test for fuel and spark, and that's the obvious things to start off with. And an easy way to test whether it's a fuel problem, because I started suspecting that it could be in the fuel tank, was to just spray quick start directly into the intake. So I did that a couple of times while my wife cranked the engine, and it didn't even splutter. There was no sign of life. So that confirmed that it was not fuel related, but we had a problem with spark. So the next thing I did was I took off this cover, unplugged one of the coil packs. In this car there's 4 cylinders and 4 coil packs, but 2 coil plugs. So they share a coil plug. So I took one of the plugs, there's 3 wires on it. The one is a ground, so I tested for continuity to the negative terminal. And next I tested for 12 volts at the power plug with a test light like this, and both checked out fine. But then the conclusive test was the signal. So I tested the signal while cranking the engine from the battery positive to the signal wire on the coil plug, because it grounds out to spark, and it should flicker, but it didn't. I tested it a few times and there was absolutely no signal getting to the coils from the ECU. Now, while it was great to get an answer, the problem was still, how do I fix this and what is the cause? So at this stage, I've relied quite a lot on GPT to generate ideas, to help me explain stuff. It got a whole lot of things wrong, and it got the locations wrong and the settings wrong, or the values wrong, but it also had it explained quite a lot of things to me and helped me formulate my own ideas and know where to do some other research. At this point, I was totally stumped. Why would the scan tool show values from the ECU, so at least it's working, but it won't send pulses to the coils and maybe even the injectors? So GPT said it's rare, but there is a chance that the ECU is fried. One way to confirm is to first just check the pin outs of the ECU grounds, and whenever they say stuff like that, my head just goes whew. So apparently you can go into the pin out plugs. It gave me very specific plug locations, and I didn't even try that, but I couldn't believe that the ECU is fried. And in another video you'll see Suzuki even concluded that the ECU on our blue Jimny is fried, which it wasn't, and I managed to fix that one myself as well. But I'll make a video on that separately. So I asked GPT, what is the probability that the ECU is fried? And it said it is rare, but after we've gone through everything else, there is a chance that one of the drivers is not working. So then, when it started talking about testing or pin out the grounds on the ECU, something clicked in my head. And I asked it, there is a bit of an oil leak from the main seal between the gearbox and the engine. And could it be that oil dripped onto the ground strap, which caused a grounding issue? And that's when it said, yes, obviously that's your issue, not the ECU. After a week of testing. So what did I do? Let me show you. So to confirm that it is a grounding issue, I just took normal jumper cables, hooked one up to the negative terminal, hooked the other onto the engine lift hook. So now the engine is properly grounded. Guess what happened? Cranked the key and it fired right up. It's a simple ground strap that is dirty. And that caused me to run around 22 different issues or tests for a whole 4 days, and it was as simple as a ground. And that's the problem with modern cars. It relies so heavily on electronics that even a small grounding issue could cause a whole lot of different problems. Like the SLK that I bought earlier this year, where the roof wouldn't open, and it was just the fact that the battery was a bit low on charge. And there was also a fault code, a check engine light. Charging the battery solved all of those electronic gremlins. So the lesson here is take a methodical approach. First test for spark and fuel before you go run after sensors and stuff, and then check that the grounds are good. After that, you can go into more detail. Anyways, please comment below if you think my process was completely flawed or if I made any technical mistakes in the video, and thank you for watching.